Another common question is, out of all the founders of sociology, is why were no women represented? A couple quick reasons for that. One is clearly at the time we were talking about a very, again, Western Europe, very patriarchal society. As a matter of fact, the Germans regarded the role of women to what was colloquially called the 4 Ks: Kinder, Kirche, Kuchen, and Kleider. In other words, clothing, church, cooking, and clothing. So women were largely unrepresented in the origins of sociology. A few exceptions. One was Harriet Martineau, who lived in the midst of the 19th century, who produced and traveled in America around the middle of the 19th century and produced a really fantastic book called Society in America, in which she did probably one of the best and earliest sociological examinations of American society. So she was the exception to that rule. When we talk about how sociology came to America, the very first department of sociology was located at the University of Chicago, which was founded in 1892. Also, the American Journal of Sociology was founded at the University of Chicago at that same time. It still exists today. Some very important American sociologists that we could mention. Jane Addams, who lived again in the latter part of the 19th century into the early part of the 20th century, was a famous researcher from the University of Chicago and established in Chicago's South Side what was known as the Hull House. For a long time, people's attitudes about the poor, the homeless, those living in poverty, the mentally ill, those people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, they were either ignored largely or taken care of by charitable organizations. It was Jane Addams who founded the Hull House, which we would probably now today call a social service agency, and probably one of the very first that attempted to identify many of the reasons that people had all these social problems and to rectify those. And for that, she was awarded the Nobel Prize. Another very important American sociologist was W.E.B. Du Bois. He was the son of freed slaves. He was born just after the Emancipation Proclamation, but clearly being the son of freed slaves, he was an African American during a time in American history where clearly racism was still an enormous issue. He did go on to graduate from Harvard with a degree in sociology, and also became one of the founding members of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, a term at the time that was used for African Americans. So Du Bois clearly spent most of his sociological research studying racism in America, post-war America. One of his most famous books was an excellent book called The Souls of Black Folk. By the beginning of the 20th century, there had been a shift in sociological emphasis away from social reform to more of social theory, the idea of coming up with ways to explain how society worked without necessarily advocating for its reform. Two of the people that we can mention in this, one by the name of Talcott Parsons, from about 1902, 1979. Parsons was probably most famous for his theories, which we'll get to in another module, about functionalism, how society works as a whole, all the various parts coinciding together. And another very important person at the time was C. Wright Mills. Mills, in the middle part of the 20th century, talked very much and predicted about what he called the power elite. He was very concerned with the power structure in American society, and his theories predicted that at some time, much as we've seen that wealth is concentrated at the top of a society, power is as well. And he predicted that the power in the United States particularly would become concentrated in the hands of a relatively small number of people, and those people he called the power elite. Clearly, when we look at the early part of the 21st century and see things like the Occupy Wall Street movement, and some other theories that we'll discuss again in a later module. We've definitely seen that C. Wright Mills theories have very much proven to be very accurate. So we can talk a little bit about the continued dual emphasis within sociology of social theory, the idea of explaining how society works, and the idea of social reform, putting sociology into practical applications to actually make changes in society. So we still see that two-sided coin in sociology existing today.